I'm Jamie S. Rich. I've been working in comics for 20 years. Join me as we dig a little deeper into how comic books are made and get to know the people who make them. This is From the Gutters.
Here we are with Michael Avon Oeming in his home, and he's the co-creator of Powers, Mice Templar, the cartoonist who writes and draws the Victories for Dark Horse, and he's here with his dog Fry as well. How's it going today?
Good. How's Fry doing? You doing all right?
I think he's ready for his moment.
Okay. His evil pet moment.
So I'm gonna do the basically easy thing and start quickly from the beginning. You first start off, your first major gig was doing Judge Dredd for DC for one of their American launches of the...
I guess that would be like that was my big job. That was kind of thing that put me on the map. But before that, I was inking here and there for Marvel and DC on like Daredevil and some Justice League stuff. The Daredevil Fall from Grace with Scott McDaniel was a lot of fun. It was only a couple of issues, but that was a lot of fun. And I'd done a bunch of indie stuff up till then. But Judge Dredd was like the first, like the big gig. It was definitely too big. I wasn't ready for it yet. It was the kind of job where I was in the right place at the right time, and I had a bunch of potential as a young upcoming talent. But I wasn't really ready to take on like the flagship Judge Dredd book, because at the time DC, not only did they get the rights for Judge Dredd, they were going to do several titles. So It was literally the flagship book of what was going to be several other Judge Dredd books. So I was penciling and inking it monthly, and it was the first time I was really penciling and inking anything monthly, let alone Judge Dredd, which is difficult enough because it was a translated property, and you had to get your head wrapped around that scene, as well as doing comics and stuff in general. So it was definitely something I wasn't really ready for, and which is a good thing. Failing, you learn a lot when you're failing.
Had you grown up reading comics, or what got you toward this kind of drawing and artwork?
There wasn't a lot of comics around when I was a kid. As far as where I was located, there wasn't any stores. I was in the kind of suburb hells of New Jersey, where there was one 7-Eleven you can kind of hang out at. And when I was younger, I was exposed here and there to little bits and pieces of Spider-Man or a comic book here and there, but there was nothing that I could really hardcore get my head wrapped around. And then like in third grade, we moved down to Texas with some other family members, my mother and I. And I couldn't adjust to it at all there. I was totally stuck in a northeastern headset.
Culture shock.
Yeah, and I didn't even understand it. So like there wasn't even like I didn't have any tools to cope with it or anything. I didn't even know that it was a different culture. There was no way of understanding any of that stuff. So I was homesick and I couldn't fit in and stuff. So I locked myself in a room, and I would literally wait week to week. What I remember about my life then was waiting for that Dungeons and Dragons cartoon to come on Saturday mornings, and because I was really into Dungeons and Dragons, and that's all I would do, is just wait for that cartoon. And then I would set the alarm to go off in the morning. I would sleep through it. And then, Jesus, I missed one thing in my life to live for, is this stupid Dungeons and Dragons cartoon. And I just slept through the thing. So that's how, I was just locked in this room and I couldn't do anything, or, So that's where my headset was, and my mindset. And then one day my mother and I went to a flea market, and there was tons of comics. It's just immediately, anybody who's been an outcast in any way, whether it was socially because you're kind of nerdy at school or you just didn't fit in or whatever, there's something so inviting about the comic books, because there's these characters that speak to you immediately on a level that novels and films don't, because it's a combination of a novel and a film. So you're immediately just sucked into this world of like Peter Parker and his dealing with his aunt, and that specifically was something that I could really deal with, because I had a lot of people in my family who were like sick or disabled, so there was all that kind of connection to the characters, and I just immediately got into comics then. And pretty much from that moment on, when we moved back to Jersey about a year later, then I knew what comics were, and I knew how to look for them, knowing to go to 7-Eleven and finding, copies there. And then Marvel used to run ads for comic book stores in the back of them, and I'm like, oh my God, there's this comic book store like a mile away, which I just didn't even know before. And that's where I met Adam Hughes. He was working at the comic book store at the time, and that got everything rolling, was meeting another person interested in comics and knowing how to get comics.
Had he been drawing anything yet? Or had he done like even Maze Agency or any of that stuff?
No, the only thing he was drawing was like signs, went to the bathroom, that
Right.
he'd leave on the store. Because he was working in a store that was as small as his living room.
Because didn't he become kind of your mentor after that?
Yeah, because we both loved comics. He wasn't being published yet. I was actually published slightly before him, which I always thought was funny because now he's like the mega stars of comics and stuff. But yeah, he taught me a lot. Like he's a very fast learner. So while I was obsessed with drawing, I didn't really have a thought process about it, but he did, and he was definitely somebody who showed me how to think about your artwork. How to think about a page, how to think about a layout before you do something. As we got older, because maybe we worked together kind of off and on like for maybe 5 years or so. And towards the last 2 of those years or 3 of those years, we were living in the same town. I would bike over to his house, and he set up a second desk for me in his studio, so I'd be drawing here and he'd be drawing there. And I remember watching him, like at this point I think he was doing Star Trek, that graphic novel. And he would look at a page. I remember watching him, and he would just look at a page for like an hour, it seemed like. And he'd have like a little line here, a little line there. And it was just this deep thought process for him about how to lay out the page and stuff. And well, I never took time like that to engage in a page. He definitely showed me how to think about what you're doing before doing it.
There was a real evolution to your style, because I remember seeing you for the first time doing Foot Soldiers, which back when I actually was at Dark Horse, so it was probably like 94, 95, we read the proposal that came through. It was myself, Bob Schreck, Scott Alley at Bob Schreck's house, and Foot Soldiers, which just like blew everybody away, had concept art from Tim Sale and Mike Mignola and all those guys that eventually all contributed to the book, but you got the actual gig to draw the first series. Now, how'd that come about?
Usually when people create a comic book, they create it together, like the artist and the writer and stuff. This is one of the few times, if ever, I've seen like a writer who has everything figured out themselves. So like all that concept stuff, Jim would draw like a really loose sketch of like Johnny Stomp and what he thought he would look like, and then give it to guys to commission pieces.
Yeah.
So when he came to me with Foot Soldiers, I was just finishing up Judge Dredd. So it was, so I still had, even though for me it was kind of a personal failure, it was career-wise, it was still a big boost. So it was a good transition. And I think Jim saw that. And yeah, I was really lucky to get to work on that with all that artwork on there and stuff.
So your style back on Foot Soldiers, I wouldn't exactly call it stiff, but it was a little more intricate, a little more tight than I think you eventually got to on Powers. What's kind of the evolution for that? Like, was that a conscious development, or?
Yeah, it was definitely a conscious development to change my style, and it came out of necessity. So early on, when I was doing Foot Soldiers, I mean, I was into Mike Mignola, but I was also influenced by guys like Kevin Nolan, Michael Golden, Art Adams. Is like some pretty intricate stuff, and that's where a lot of my line work was at the time. I was thinking very sharp inking lines, and a lot of detail. So years go by, like 1996, I have my son. My son is born, and this is at the same time the comics market crashed in the mid 90s.
Right.
So like I was working really hard in Foot Soldiers, and I felt like I was like in a bunker. Like I was working hard on Foot Soldiers, and I look up and I come out of the bunker, and it's a fucking wasteland. Like there's no jobs. Everybody knows just they can't find work and stuff. And I kind of went back to inking for the most part, and I was working with Neil Vokes, who's another mentor of mine, on Ninjak, and doing bits and pieces here. Foot Soldiers Ship of Fools came out of that time period because I literally had to make work for myself.
Right.
But the big thing was struggling with the bills, and then my son was born. And once he had a kid, like I couldn't really fuck around anymore with the potential of good money to be made and stuff, and I needed to find something that was really, really steady and rock solid. I had to get my first like real job. So I did that, and I was working as a security guard. And this is about the same time period I was trying to get a gig or two on the Adventures books, like Superman Adventures or something. But that's when I said, maybe I should concentrate on more of a style that's less render intensive. And that's how that stuff kind of came about. It was out of necessity and love, like, because at first I didn't think it was marketable, and I thought nobody would want to see any of this kind of stuff. But the necessity of it made it happen. And so it's one of those things where bad things happen for a good reason,
Because I guess I kind of always associated you with those Caliber years for some reason, because of Bendis, and that's where Bendis and Mac came out of.
Yeah.
Which you've been, of course, connected to because you guys called yourselves Mob for a while, Mac Oeming,
Yeah.
Bendis. Is that where you met Brian Michael Bendis and how you started collaborating?
I met Brian with David Mack at the same time. We were doing a signing at this place called Claude's Comics in Pennsylvania. And, you know, he was doing AK Goldfish, and I think 2 issues of Kabuki were out, something like that. And I was just dabbling in creator-owned stuff with Ship of Fools, and it was in Caliber's. We're doing a Ship of Fools story that was going to be in Caliber's anthology series.
Negative Burn?
Negative Burn, that's right. Yeah, I couldn't even remember. It's been that long.
There was an element with Dark Horse versus Caliber, I think, that we felt like, particularly DHP versus Negative Burn.
Well, Dark Horse was always super cool. I mean, even, like, I remember wanting to work for Dark Horse for years, even before Foot Soldiers. And I think I did one thing with my inked in issue of Motorhead. I'm like,
right.
Yeah.
From the Dark Horse Heroes.
Yeah. But speaking of going to comic book, or to comic book conventions, I mean, that was super valuable. That's where I got most of my jobs and learning how to do what I do. Was I would bring my work for portfolio reviews, not necessarily to get jobs, but just to learn, you know.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of that, and it sounds like that worked out for you too. Like,
yeah. I would spend hours for Dark Horse sitting there reviewing portfolio reviews, and would meet. I mean, I met Ryan Sook in a portfolio review.
Wow.
Like different people over the years. Apparently, gave Gerard Way a portfolio review once. I don't remember.
That's funny. It's so crazy that Gerard's whole connection with comics. Like, evidently, I worked with him with Jim Kruger on something. I don't know what it was, but I inked him on something, which I didn't find out about until recently.
Yeah, he'd done stuff for the big books, and I think he did stuff for Hart Fisher for a while.
Yeah, no, he was working with Hart Fisher, which was funny because at the same time I was working for a company called the Comic Zone that did a lot of like serial killer books and porn, like with Dr. Hooters and Night of the Giving Head, you know, classic porn, you know, high class comic book porn.
You weren't the one that did Mighty Morphin Rump Rangers, did you?
No, but I think they published that.
I've never been able to find out who did that because that's one submission I remember getting. I was like, who just sent me Mighty Morphin Rump Rangers?
Yeah, but I mean, you know, at the time when you were like doing indie press books, back then you didn't know if your orders were going to be enough to publish. So like you would literally come up with a concept, solicit it, and then wait to see if you had enough orders to publish. But if you're doing something specialized like porn or a serial killer book, you knew you automatically had not enough to really make a living or whatever, but you knew it would go to print. So that was a great end, really. I mean, no pun intended, but
so this makes the genesis of Powers all make sense. Serial killers and porn.
Well, sort of in a way, and like to the extent of I know my personal filter for things really varies from a lot of other people, and I think maybe it comes from that background. So a lot of times when we do stuff that's shocking or supposedly shocking in Powers, I don't think of it as, and it's not because my inner barometer is so high. Like I'm not sitting around watching like life, death, torture crap or whatever. You know, I don't like any of that stuff. But you know, the idea of like art as an expression without boundaries is very important to me, and it runs pretty deeply. So I'm always shocked when people are shocked by the language in comics or Powers specifically, especially if a book has been around for, 13 years. Somebody's going to say, oh, this seems like they're being vulgar for the sake of being vulgar. Well, fuck you. You haven't read the book then. Don't be telling me what, the tone of the book that's been around for 13 years is, and why people are shocked by that stuff. In comics, where again, it's an art form where you're supposed to express yourself freely. And it's not Marvel or DC where, it is supposed to have those kind of boundaries. And that stuff always shocks me. I don't know why.
Yeah, because even your personal stuff that you're now doing as a writer-artist is basically taking genre and melding your own personal expression in them, but you are going to extremes that you don't necessarily see in those genres. Like the Victories has issues about child molestation, drugs, and violence in general. What violence means is that important to you? Or is it just natural? You don't really think about it?
Yeah, it is kind of natural, and a little too much so. Like even when I try to do something that's pretty. Takio is the only thing that's been completely all ages for me and stuff. But every time I've tried to do something that's pretty, clean and straightforward, those things still come up. And specifically in like Wild Rover and Victories, it was coming out of going to the therapy and starting to discover stuff about, myself and my past and trying to figure out like, why do I torture myself over certain things? I went through a lot of anxiety issues, especially at the time I went to therapy because I had moved across country away from my son. He's still back in Jersey, and we have a great relationship, and we see each other all the time. But I was working full-time at Valve, which is a video game company. I was offered a job that I just couldn't turn down. You know, it was going to basically provide a future for myself and for my son and my wife, and like we could, you know, plan for retirement and plan for his like college and stuff. So I had to move across country for that, and he stayed back in New Jersey with his mother, which was really, really tough. I think in some ways it was tougher on me than him. Like kids can bounce back from certain things much easier. And we have a great relationship. He comes out, stays this summer. He loves Portland and the West Coast, and he wants to come out here and stuff. But it was really super hard on me. On top of that, I was still doing comics full-time and working full-time in an office for the first time in my life. And even though if you know what working at a video game company is like, it's not like a real job. But
you still got to show up and
yes, you still have to
do the
show
work.
up.
Yeah.
There's a ton of like, you know, politics and stuff that even in a really laid-back place like Valve, like I was completely unprepared for and stuff. And it's just a lot of pressure. And video games are so different than comics. All that stuff was just hitting me really, really hard. And while I was having anxiety attacks and panic attacks just constantly, drinking a lot. And part of that was the environment again at the game company. There's a lot of drinking that goes on. There's a lot of drinking goes on in comic books in general and stuff. So all that stuff just started getting out of control, and I had to, you know, really take a look at myself and my life. And therapy was great for that, to the extent that even though right now I'm not in therapy, I want to find a good therapist, because you can really discover so much about yourself and other people in your relationships that you can immediately turn onto writing. And that's what I liked about therapy. Like, so even as I was discovering stuff about myself, like, oh, the reason why I draw constantly, I could bring a sketchbook with me everywhere I go, even if I don't use it, is it's a control mechanism. And that's why we get panic attacks a lot of times in like a car or talking to somebody at a casual dinner or something. Like I felt trapped and like I couldn't control anything. The only thing in my life I ever could control was my art and drawing. And that was like this amazing revelation to me. And then I realized, well, if I want to look at that as an analogy for like a superhero or comics, the stuff that I'm working in, if art is my superpower and I'm using it as a control mechanism because of anxieties and psychological damage. So like every time I'm doing something positive and awesome with art, it's also carrying this echo of this background of like heaviness that goes back to my mother and all this kind of crap. Like, wow, what a great thing for a superhero to have if his origins of his powers are also the source of his greatest pain and stuff, and you're carrying that around with you everything you do. And that was the origins of both the Wild Rover and Victories.
Because Wild Rover is about drinking, but drinking as like a literal demon. Yeah. So was that in a way then also your own exorcism to get that out there?
It was actually a lot more about my mother than it was about me. So while I had an issue with drinking for a little bit, it was just one of those things I had to check myself. It's not like a lifelong thing or anything. In fact, because my mother's really hardcore alcoholism, I didn't even dabble in drinking at all until like my late 20s. And it was a very slow ride to be able to like comfortably able to get drunk if I wanted to and know it wasn't a thing. I was just so afraid of that situation and stuff. But it's still something you have to look out for, especially when you're under high stress situations. But my mother dealt with it so long. I grew up with alcoholism all around me in my family. My mother and other people in my family also had huge addiction issues, whether it was with gambling, alcohol, or drugs and stuff. Somehow, I guess I was lucky enough my addiction was art and comics. Yeah. So Wild River is largely about my mother, really, and watching her deal with those demons. And you know, I kind of, I don't know what the word is, but you know, I let the character own alcoholism, and I try to make it like almost fun. You know, it's really trying to own the issue as far as like the idea of the alcoholic hero. Fun's not the right word, but you know, like it's such a complicated thing because it does define some people and what their life is, and they can't ever shake it. But that doesn't make them less of a human being or anything. So I wanted to try to fictionalize that with Shane and do with like my mother's stuff, because it always felt like a curse that was passed on in a family, and I thought that made a really good metaphor for a story.